I wasn't going to start here, but I think it's important. I think it's important to know our history. I think it's important to know our recent history. And I was disturbed when I saw Madam Secretary Condoleezza Rice on The View.
On The View?
This morning. So it's very interesting because we are down revisionist kind of history lane to some degree. And we lost the great Colin Powell a few days ago. And I respect him as an icon and the work that he did. But I was already seeing some revisionist history with General Colin Powell. But I respect the work that he did, and he broke barriers. But, it's kind of fascinating, it's history. But Condoleezza Rice is somebody who is not, a four-star general like Secretary, like General Colin Powell. Let me remind people that Condoleezza Rice is the same person who admittedly was shopping for Ferragamo shoes and going to Spam-A-Lot on Broadway while people who looked like her were dying in Hurricane Katrina. And she was allegedly confronted by a woman in the shoe store saying, "What are you doing? Why aren't you in DC taking care of doing something for what's happening with Hurricane Katrina?" And then she's on The View this morning, and they're talking about the January 6th commission. Now, this really shouldn't surprise people, but I want folks to understand, like, this is where we are. This is a brilliant woman who grew up in the Jim Crow South, Birmingham, Alabama. She always reminds us of this. And she says that she agrees with Senator Mitch McConnell that it is time to move on from the January 6th commission, that we have to get to the real issues. Now, I don't know why we can't do multiple things at one time. I don't know why. But according to her, it is time to move on. And her and Sonny had a little bit of tension when we were having this exchange. Do we have that clip?
I think it's really politically expedient for Mitch McConnell to say, let's move on, especially when the former twice impeached disgraced president enjoys attacking Mitch McConnell. But the problem is that past will become prologue if we don't find out exactly what happened January 6th.
And we will.
So it's not time right now.
We will find out.
We must find out before moving on.
We will find out. But I'm going to tell you, I live in California, not Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And the American people do have other concerns that we ought to be thinking about and talking about.
Respectfully,
and
Madam Secretary, I think
let me finish now, Sonny, because as I said, I thought this would happen in countries I studied, not countries that I lived in. Mm-hmm. Our institutions have to be upheld. What happened on January 6th was wrong. I don't know how much more strongly I can say what happened on January 6th was wrong.
This is what's really fascinating, Amisha, and you're a political strategist. Madam Secretary Condoleezza Rice is done with politics. She's not running for office. It's not like she's saying things to win an election. It's not like she's saying things to get in good with the Republican Party. This is a Black woman from Birmingham, Alabama, who saw the Confederate flag in the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, where police officers were hurt, where police officers have died. And you don't think this country can juggle a few things at once to have this January 6th commission to find out what happened and to prevent it from happening again. And you say it's time to move on. And Condoleezza Rice is not a grifter. She's not some of these other pseudo-Republicans. She obviously truly believes this. Senator Tim Scott, he voted against the January 6th commission. Made no sense to me. But this is a Black woman from the Jim Crow South that says move on. Because the truth is, if we quote unquote move on like Mitch McConnell wants, because she was defending Mitch McConnell, if we actually do that, this is only going to come right back on us. Because I believe they're plotting again. I believe they're looking for another insurrection that'll be more successful. How does a woman, a former Secretary of State, sincerely believe this. She's not running for election. She's not trying to make Bush feel good. She sincerely believes that moving on is the right thing for the country and not investigating what happened. It just, and I'm saying black woman because she keeps on saying the Jim Crow South. She'll fall back on her identity when it's convenient. But in the next clip, you'll see, maybe it's not. But this is just the Secretary of State, former, saying this. Your thoughts?
What we heard from Condoleezza Rice was basically lighting the candle at both ends. She is a tried and true conservative, and she is using conservative talking points and rhetoric. It's disappointing because she's extremely scholarly. She's a brilliant woman. We can't underscore that enough. But I think that even though we recognize that she is not running for anything, she isn't going to ever run for anything, she is still someone, she's not a Colin Powell. She's not going to call out her party. She's not going to speak against very popular rhetoric amongst the party, but she also wove in something I thought was very interesting if you listened really closely. She reminded everyone that that she has this political analysis background, that has this political science background. She reminded people that she understands how polls are done. And I will, give her credit to this as someone who's worked on them and has analyzed them as well. At the end of the day, polls are largely depicted by the types of questions asked, and the group that you chose to ask the questions to is going to determine how they answer those questions. With that being said, she also spoke to something that the American public is actually feuding with, those kitchen table issues. All of those things aside, yes, people want jobs and fair wages. Yes, people want childcare. Yes, people want healthcare and an answer to COVID-19. There are 5,000 things or more that people want, the American public wants right now from this administration. But when it comes to the uprooting of our democracy, when it comes to former Vice President Pence having gallows set up outside of the Capitol building to actually hang the man, when it comes to Confederate flags and the United States flag being used to beat officers, we have to be very real and very strategic about what was happening on January 6th. The Republican Party and many leading Republicans wanted us all to move on January 7th. They're over it. Exactly. And at this point, they want to dismantle the conversation. They want to dismantle any levels of investigation. And mark my words, I do think that they will. I think that if this goes too long, which is the bet of the Republican Party, because come midterms, they're pretty much going to be in control of the House anyway. So at the end of the day, their first order of business is going to be to get rid of this and try to erase it from our nation's history and our memory as well. She is betting on that. She is betting on the fact, and it's a disgrace because she was Secretary of State. It's a disgrace because she took an oath before our country. It's a disgrace because she understands how a democracy stands versus how it turns into an authoritarian regime. And in her conversation, she basically paid homage to what would have happened on January 6th. And it's frustrating because she knows better. She knows better. She's not running for anything. She doesn't need the Trumpite vote. But it goes to show the power of where the Republican rhetoric and where the Republican psyche is right now, where even somebody who is astute, somebody who has as much power in their voice, as much power in their presence as Condoleezza Rice, decides that she's going to go out on the crazy limb.
Doesn't stop there. Then there's a conversation about critical race theory and history. And Madam Secretary Condoleezza Rice believes that our real history is being taught. I mean, right here, she is making sure that she is saying she's saying Tucker Carlson talking points in this one. I shouldn't have been surprised, but this kind of made my jaw drop a little bit, considering she is from Birmingham, Alabama, the Jim Crow South, which so little of the Jim Crow South is ever really even taught in schools. Listen to this.
And let me be very clear. I grew up in segregated Birmingham, Alabama. I couldn't go to a movie theater or to a restaurant with my parents. I went to segregated schools till we moved to Denver. My parents never thought I was going to grow up in a world without prejudice, but they also told me that's somebody else, not yours. You're going to overcome it, and you are going to be anything you want to be. And that's the message that I think we ought to be sending to kids. One of the worries that I have about the way that we're talking about race is that it either seems so big that somehow white people now have to feel guilty for everything that happened in the past. I don't think that's very productive. Or Black people have to feel disempowered by race. I would like Black kids to be completely empowered, to know that they are beautiful in their Blackness. But in order to do that, I don't have to make white kids feel bad for being white.
Wow. Wow. There have been a handful of reports from conservative publications that white children were taught that being white is wrong. There's been a handful of reports that, and I haven't seen this in the New York Times or so and so, but there have been some reports at a handful of schools across the country that this happened. Now, if a teacher is teaching a child that being white is inherently wrong, that obviously is wrong, right? But the issue,
it's also obviously not happening. But go ahead.
right? Exactly. Like if that is actually happening, then that's wrong. But the issue, and for her to say that people are being taught the true history. There are actual bills, I covered this yesterday, all over the country saying that you must teach the opposing view of the Holocaust. You can't mention the KKK. Here are the limitations of even mentioning slavery. And she believes that white people are being taught to feel guilty about who they are. And then she says that that Black people are being taught to feel disempowered by race. Here's how I felt disempowered: not knowing my history. When I knew my history, then I felt empowered. That actually empowered me to understand how history works, to know. And of course, we all love Harriet Tubman and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but to even know our history beyond those two figures, to even know our history beyond Frederick Douglass. And even I even learned very little about Frederick Douglass, to be honest with you. But how in the world does knowing your real history, the raw history, not empower you? And Joy Behar made a really good point that in Germany, you not only learn the Holocaust, you learn the nitty gritty of the Holocaust. When you're in elementary, I have Boris Kojo tell me this, who was born in Germany. When you're in elementary, when you're in middle school, you learn the raw of it so you don't repeat it again. So how, again, this is somebody, you were born and raised in the Jim Crow South. Secretary Rice, that the history of the Jim Crow South is not being taught. And if you're teaching it properly, no one's going to feel guilty. And it actually might help to dismantle even a bit of white supremacy. I believe white supremacy, it starts in the home and it's solidified in the schools. So how unfortunate, whoa. Go ahead, Amisha.
The basis of the civil rights landscape has always taken place on the forefront within our nation's public schools. That's not new. So seeing this fight against critical race theory, which isn't even a theory that is taught in the K through 12 program, which isn't even a theory that is taught in the higher ed space when we're talking about colleges, it is a law school theory for those who have taken an elective course in it, which means that the majority of America will never have to learn anything about critical race theory. Be that as it may, what we have seen is a warping of history from many conservatives across this country, particularly those who feel uncomfortable with giving African Americans and African American heritage its due in our history books, which has always been the case. That's why we know of MLK and Rosa Parks and a select few and far between pre-Reconstruction and post the Civil Rights era, as if our blip in history as African Americans is 12 people and that's it. So I think that we have to be real about what has been done for so long to eradicate Black history and Black historical contribution to this country, but also because it makes white people feel more comfortable to not have to acknowledge the pain, the suffering, the human rights abuses, the inhumanity that they have utilized not only against African Americans, but also against those of Asian descent, also against those of Native American descent, also against people of immigrant backgrounds, the Latinx community, time and time again. Basically, anybody who wasn't white got the American treatment. And that was not a really good treatment. What we know is that sometimes we read things and we internalize it and think that was a really bad time in American history. I can read about things that didn't even happen in my community and consider them atrocities. I think that it's horrible that America took so long to get involved in World War II when we knew what was going on. I think that it's horrible that we consistently as a nation will allow things to bubble up. There didn't need to be television that showcase what was going on in the South in the 60s. Hell, people knew what was going on. They knew that crosses were being burned in yards. They knew that Black men were getting hung. They knew that they were getting hung, castrated, beaten over things that weren't even actual crimes. They knew what was happening. So to have waited that long, I think that there's a level of disgust that you feel as an American, understanding that that was what happened. But with that being said, most of it isn't being taught in our America's public schools anyway. And I think I've said it on this show before, Clay, as somebody who has written education policy, who has worked in the K through 12 system, my frustration is that in addition to all of this, 85% of our nation's public schools are led by white women, period. So just that in and of itself, the people who not only lead our classrooms, but create the textbooks that our children are going to read, are going to learn from, largely don't look like us at all. The vantage point that they teach through is one of their own. It's one that will never fully encompass the experiences, the lived experiences of our ancestors, or even present day when it comes to minorities across this country. The Condoleezza Rice comments aren't necessarily surprising because she's made similar ones in the past. She has this ideology that I think several Black Republicans do, who feel as though if I was able to rise, and this is my background, I've come from, a
Right.
civil rights era, with that and other thing, then these other Black people can't use bad experiences in America that their ancestors had as a crutch. They should be able to figure it out too. That's the train she's going down. And if white people feel bad because their ancestors treated Black people like crap, they can do something about it. They can change the future. You can't change the past, but you can damn sure change the future. Not telling them and not acknowledging the pain that was associated with just Black existence and Black bodies in this country and the systems that were built to continue to hurt us for generations to come. That's not helping them. It's not. And I don't think that Condoleezza Rice's comments coming from a Black woman who grew up in the civil rights era, a Black woman who grew up in a hotbed of civil rights in Alabama, a Black woman who is scholarly, who understands fully what she is doing. She is getting out there and she is speaking white racist language, trying to eradicate the importance of American history. This isn't African American history. This is American
Right.
history. And we have to be very real about that because we shouldn't have to go to an HBCU for it to be our first real entryway or entry point into the history of our own people. And I think that once our nation decides that at some point they are going to recognize that you're not unpatriotic because you talk the truth about American history. I can go to Afghanistan, I can go to Libya, I can go to Haiti, I can go to France, I can go to Saudi Arabia. Those young kids can tell you about their culture. They can tell you about their history from 300, 400 years ago.
Oh
America
my
is still
God.
a very young country,
Yeah.
yet we do not have that. What we have is fairy tales of grandeur about George Washington and some apples and Honest Abe. We do not have the honesty, the truth about what happened here, how we got to be the nation that we are, the people that we took advantage of, the systems that we designed to keep significant populations under, and why we consistently have these race conversations every day when we've been fighting the same war for equity since America became America.
Yeah, we got, it's easy, you don't see Madam Secretary Rice too often. I mean, you're not going to forget Amisha. Other folks who are in this world aren't going to forget. But it's easy when you see her do a book and do a little delicate interview. It's easy to forget. I mean, Google, just look at her record when she was Secretary of State. Look at her record. It's revisionist history is so dangerous. And maybe the reason, Amisha, why Condoleezza Rice is against real history being taught is because it might unearth some of her history. So maybe she's like, wait a minute, if y'all go back to 1891, I don't want y'all to go back to 2004. Hold up now, 2005, 2006. Wait a minute now. Let's just keep it real simple because then y'all going to start looking at me.
I think that's partially it. I think the bigger piece is that Condoleezza has been able to rise to the heights she's been able to rise to because she has played the game. She has been able to speak white supremacy through a Black face. She has been able to ignore the plight of Black people. She has been able to castigate those who she feels as though they didn't take the opportunities that were given to them because everybody has an equal playing field in these United States. And if I made it from, pre-civil rights era Alabama, you can too. I think that because she echoes those sentiments and repeats them regularly, the comments she made on The View today weren't surprising. But in the context of CRT and this ongoing debate around what should be taught in our schools, they're extremely frustrating, as well as her comments around January 6th. But she's a tried and true conservative. And at the end of the day, I don't expect Condoleezza to do anything other than the backflip she's been doing for the Republican Party for generations now.
She plays piano pretty good.
And she still vies for and hopes to be NFL commissioner one day. And I root for her for that position.
True. I forgot about that. But Amisha, if she became, you mean taking Roger Goodell's job?
Oh yes, I mean nobody's gonna be taking a knee again, but
Oh, that's what I'm saying. Let me tell you something. If y'all don't like Roger Goodell, which I don't either, if it's Commissioner Condoleezza Rice, oh no, you won't be taking no knee. You hell,
the
you
Negro
really
national
want to
anthem, all of it.
lift every voice and sing, oh hell no, we're going to do we're going to recite the original Star Spangled Banner. We're going to do the actual poetry and read every line and include the language about slavery that they edit out. Oh yeah, if she becomes that commissioner, oh, you really see it go. No apology, no social justice initiative, no no Mary J. Blige performance.